Story number 1. The Couch, a creepypasta credited to Johnny. Okay, disclaimer. To the very best of my knowledge, this story is true. I don't expect to convince you. Truth be told, I've had a hard time coming to terms with it myself. Cliché as it may be, I really am a rational person. And, if not for this, I would probably be the most stone-faced atheist you'd ever meet. But after much internal struggle and debate, I have come to the conclusion that there are things in life that simply can't be explained with reason, at least in the form in which we know it. Logic, for all trust we place in it, is really nothing than a candle, all too easily snuffed out. And when it is gone, we are left alone in the dark, and everything we would scoff at by daylight suddenly becomes very believable. All right, before I wax too melodramatic, here's my story. I was very young, only 4 or 5 at most, before either of my siblings were born. It was just Mommy and Daddy and me, living in our little house in Great Bend, Kansas. Very quaint. We were a young family without much money, and most of our furniture was second-hand. It was in the middle of the day, summer, hot, boring. I was playing marbles by myself on the thin carpet beside the huge old flower-patterned couch. Mom was down the hall in the kitchen, and Dad was at work. Why I was trying to roll marbles around on the carpet, I don't know. We had a perfectly good linoleum floor, after all, but there I was, swishing the marbles back and forth, happily bouncing them into each other. Then, in my overzealous enthusiasm, I rolled too hard. My favorite marble, the clear ruby red one, zipped into the dark space under the couch and was lost. Damn it! Dad wasn't home, and he was the only one strong enough to move that huge old couch for me. I'd have to get my marble back myself. I reached my hand under the couch, tentatively at first, then deeper. Encountering no marbles, I pulled my hand back out in disappointment. Then, a hand reached out from under the couch, back at me. I remember the image vividly, and I suspect I always will. It was a slim hand with tapered fingers. A woman's hand. It was gnarled and wrinkled as if aged, and it was dead black. Not black as in African, black as in dead. Of course, back then I didn't know that corpses blacken as they decompose, so I didn't know what the black meant. The hand reached out to me as far as it could, which was up to the wrist. Then it retreated under the couch. Then it emerged again, this time pushing with a little crumpled-up plastic bag with a logo on it I didn't recognize. It waited, as if expecting me to take the bag. Then, when I didn't, it pulled the bag back under the couch and was gone. I got up, walked down to the kitchen, and told my mommy about what happened. Why I didn't run screaming, or at least run, I don't really know. All I can say is I was a little kid. A hand reaching out from under the couch at me didn't seem like that huge of a deal. I hadn't learned yet what was and what was not permissible in reality. I had no worldview. Mom was skeptical, but walked me back to the couch and explained how I was probably imagining things. She even reached her hand under the couch to convince me that nothing was down there. Later, Dad lifted the couch up for me, and the only thing under the couch was, of course, my missing marble, plus a few more marbles I didn't remember even losing. But here's the scary part. For years, I remembered this. I even developed a weird fantasy of little hand people living under the couch, and I, in my childlike innocence, believed that they would catch me and take me away if I ever reached into their domain again. Then, as I grew older, I wrote the memory off as a dream I had had as a child, cute but silly. Then a few years ago, I recounted the story to my mother. She gave me a funny look and told me she remembered it, because after all, she had been there. She told me that she remembered me coming to her in the middle of the day and telling her about the hand under the couch, and remembered being highly disturbed by my story, since I was an extremely quiet, well-behaved kid who didn't ever lie. Then she told me about the couch itself. According to her, she and Dad had gotten the couch from the estate of an old woman who had actually died on it. This was the first time I had heard about this, but it sure explained why they got rid of the couch within a month of my story. But here's the part that truly frightens me, even to this day. The part that I have to try so hard to get out of my mind some nights. Remember that bag the hand pushed towards me? I've never forgotten the logo that was on it, and recently, as in a few years ago, I saw the same logo again on what looked like the same type of bag in a hardware store. It was a bag of utility razor blades. Story number 2. The Entities of Klaus Wood, an anonymous creepypasta. If you're ever in Canterbury or its surrounding areas, I suggest you stay away from Klaus Wood. It's fairly small and remarkably unexceptional compared to some of the other woodland in the area, so most people tend to avoid it. This made it the perfect place for an impromptu camping trip for me to get away from it all. It's actually quite dense woodland when you get right into it, giving you that feeling of utter isolation from the rest of the world. This made it the perfect spot, or so it seemed. You see, there is a reason why Klaus Wood has been left nearly untouched for decades. There's a reason why the local people chose to avoid it. Hell, the road leading through it hasn't been used in so long, the overgrowth has claimed it. But we'll get to that later. The day had dawned, the car was packed, and the drinking had begun. Of course, as is the way with most things, the journey wasn't as smooth as one would have hoped. The road which leads through Klaus Wood was actually a lot worse than I had anticipated. It was in a state of complete disrepair, with weeds and brambles completely immersing it. I had to leave my car in the closest spot I could find and walk the rest of the way, which wasn't easy with the gear I had. This really was a laborious task. The forest was thick and unforgiving, leaving me scratched and bruised from my battle with the foliage. I had a small knife with me which I used to hack through the brush, but it was still a challenging task. I was beginning to get a bit nervous at this point. I had never been camping by myself before, especially not in the middle of the woods, but I decided now was as good a time as any to prove to myself that I could do it. That, and I had just watched 20 episodes of Bear Grylls the night before and figured, hey, if he can do it, why can't I? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Klaus Woods is very quiet, almost silent in fact. You'd expect to hear birds singing and local wildlife going about their day-to-day, but there was nothing. It seemed as if I was the only living thing in the forest. It was a hard feeling to shake, but I stayed rational and told myself to stop being stupid, so I kept going. As luck would have it, only after about an hour's walk I managed to find a great clearing to set up in. It was probably about 30 feet in diameter and almost a perfect circle, with one solitary tree off to the north, just breaking the line of other trees. There was also an interesting rock formation about 30 feet away from it. It looked like some sort of scepter. It had a large black spherical rock atop a long black cuboid. I marveled at it for a few seconds before moving on. I decided to set up camp here. Darkness was creeping in, as was the general panic at the very thought of having to set up my tent blind. so this seemed like the best spot I would find. I'm not even sure of what time of day it was. The forest canopy is so dense not a lot of light manages to seep through. Luckily, my tent was just a pop-up tent, which you need to peg down, so it was set up in no time. "I call her Lucy," I said, chuckling to myself. She was big enough to fit 3 men in as well. I giggled to myself for a little while, cursing the fact that there was no one around to hear my spectacular joke. I then grabbed my chair, started a fire, and got to drinking. The tent was on my left, the fire was dead ahead. The place where I, relieved myself was behind me, and the thick tree line was all around. I still cannot believe how dark that night was. The darkness was suffocating. I'm not sure if it was because I was nervous or what, but I felt as if I was gasping for air. I couldn't see past the fire. I could barely even see my own tent, for that matter. I tried to take my mind off things by carrying on with roasting the marshmallows and listening to music, but to and behold, my phone was dead. Have you ever experienced a silence so intense it's almost deafening? There was literally no noise anywhere. I could almost hear my insides working as I scoffed the marshmallows down, desperately trying to fight off the overwhelming panic I could sense dawning upon me. All of a sudden, the silence was broken. There was a rustling of leaves about 10 feet to the right of me. Dim lights appeared around the clearing. I'm not sure if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if it was just ambience from the fire. I can't even begin to imagine how much I must have looked like a deer in the headlights at that moment. My head turned faster than a bullet leaves a gun. Seriously, I should have sprayed my neck or something from that, because it was inhuman how fast I turned. I was straining my eyes and craning my neck, desperately trying to identify the cause of the noise, when I saw it. It was only because it moved again that I noticed it. Had it stayed still, I would have missed it forever. There was a tiny little bunny rabbit on the floor, hopping around without a care in the world. I breathed a sigh of relief, cleaned the metaphorical shit from my pants, and chuckled to myself about being such a coward. I didn't sleep at all that night. It was too dark, too quiet, I felt, watched. It's hard to explain. I felt as if at any moment someone or something would come crashing through Lucy's flap to ambush me. But nothing came. My hand didn't leave the knife I'd placed under my pillow for 1 second. I was ashamed. I felt like I had let myself down, like a frightened child calling out to his parents in the night. I felt that I had to talk to someone, get out of my own head. I summoned all my courage and decided to stay another night, get over my childlike fear of the dark. So that's exactly what I did. It's a good thing I was already on my way to my makeshift toilet, because what I saw when leaving my tent that morning would have caused my bowels to evacuate faster than a house on fire. The rabbit, which was so merrily hopping around my tent that previous night, was dead. Cut in half, in fact, and left at the base of the isolated tree. I couldn't look at it for too long. It was making me feel ill. How could I have not heard? It didn't make any sense. How could I have heard hopping around but not getting sliced apart? Whatever did it must have been bigger than the rabbit, so surely it would have made more noise. I assumed it was some sort of bird nesting in the tree that killed it, and it must have fell. That's really the only plausible explanation. I decided to kill time by having a look around the surrounding area. Like I said, I had never been camping before on my own, so I had no idea how to pass the time. So I decided to go for a quick explore. And what do you think I saw? You guessed it, more trees. There were a few interesting things, though. For example, I had only walked about 30 feet or so before I stumbled upon a large, perfectly spherical black rock. It was about the size of your average football, nestling itself atop another larger rock. This other rock was similar to the first. It was black and smooth, but it resembled more of a cuboid than a sphere. A strange feeling washed over me. Had I got myself lost? This was an extremely similar formation to the one I had seen yesterday, but I had gone the opposite way from my camp. I ran back through the brush to where I assumed the other formation was. Luckily, I found it. I let out a sigh of relief, releasing that I hadn't gone completely insane. I was intrigued now, though. I started wandering around the edge of the clearing looking for more of these formations. I managed to find 2 more. There was one to the north of the camp, one to the east, and one to the south, and one to the west. I'll admit, I should have been more wary, but I thought nothing of it and moved on. Besides, the darkness was creeping in again, so I wanted to get back to camp, back to safety. Darkness had well and truly come. It was awful. I wanted to leave, get back to my home, but I'd never find my way. The darkness had literally enveloped my camp. It was heavy, thick, and suffocating. The silence was back as well. Something was different about tonight, though. It was hard to put my finger on it. I had this overwhelming sense of dread. The fire was much smaller than last night as well, so I felt even more blind. The feeling of helplessness was getting to me, and panic was starting to take hold. So I decided to have a little look around and see if there was anything interesting. You know, I've never seen an owl before, so I was scanning the trees, seeing if anything at all caught my attention. As I was scanning the tree line, something caught my attention. There was a dim light coming from the edge of the clearing, roughly about 30 feet away from me. My peripheral vision just about managed to pick it up. I strained my neck to see what it was, but unfortunately, it sunk back into the darkness. I hoped for some reason it would be another person. My naivety was getting to me. Another speck of light appeared. I could only see it in my peripheral vision as I turned my head, but it was roughly 90 degrees away from where the first one was. Again I turned to look, but I couldn't see it anymore. Wild thoughts started running through my head at this point. Who were these people? What were they doing here? What did they want from me? I even began to wonder if it was the rock formations that were somehow emitting light, but I dismissed it. I had another scan of the tree line, and my heart stopped. Something had caught my eye. It was hard to make out exactly what it was, what I thought I'd saw, since I only caught it for a brief moment. There was a silhouette of a person peering out from behind the tree. The lone tree which I had chosen to camp with. As soon as I looked at it, it disappeared, sneaking back behind the tree. I leaped out of my chair. My heart was racing. My limbs felt like jelly. Jesus, I was a mess. I felt all the blood rush out of my head. I decided the best thing to do was to turn back to my tent and try to get some sleep. I turned towards the tent and nearly blacked out. There was another one peering out at me from behind my tent. Again, I only caught it for a brief second, but it was much closer than the last one. I couldn't make out any features. It was just a black humanoid mass. The thing was dark. Darker than anything I'd ever seen. It seemed to emanate hatred and anger, in the same way that at the time I must have been emanating fear. I ran into my tent and pulled the sleeping bag over my head and tried to sleep. Sunlight was burning my unopened eyes. I opened them, dazed and confused, delirious. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was, but my surroundings were off. I wasn't lying down. I was leaning against something. It took me a moment, but I eventually realized what was wrong. I was still in my sleeping bag, but I wasn't in my tent. Frightened, I looked around. My heart felt like it was about to explode. It was beating so fast. My tent was dead ahead of me. The flap was ripped open, and some of my stuff was strewn around the clearing. It finally dawned on me. I realized where I had woken up. I turned my head upward towards the sky and confirmed my fears. I was sat at the base of the tree. I sprung to my feet. I was blind with terror at this point. There, sticking out of the tree, was my knife. Carved into the tree was one word: Leave. And that's exactly what I did.